Hi, I'm Dr. Rachel Douchant. Welcome to the Free Exchange, which is hosted by the Hammond Institute here at Lindenwood University. I am director of the Liberty and Ethics Center, which is the humanities wing of the Institute, and I'm here with the director of the Institute itself, Howard Wall. Welcome, Howard.
Thanks.
And so today we want to talk about the legalization of drugs, always an exciting topic.
Always exciting.
And actually becoming ever more popular, I think, as an idea. The first thing I want to say is that when we opened up the Hammond Institute, we were talking to a media expert who said to me, now, Rachel, you're a libertarian. When I think of a libertarian, I think of someone who's in the corner smoking marijuana. I couldn't believe it when she said that, because it's always been clear in my own mind that being against the drug war is really the issue with drug legalization, not being pro-drug use. There's plenty of people who do not use drugs themselves and don't recommend anyone else to do it, but you might just be against the drug war on total other grounds.
Right. No, you're right. And maybe it's a big L libertarian, meaning the Libertarian Party, which in the U.S., which I suspect most of them are sitting in the corner smoking pot.
Smoking pot, yeah.
But in the libertarian tradition or the classical liberal tradition,
right.
It's a completely different story.
Absolutely.
And you know, and there are good reasons to not want people to consume drugs.
Yeah, I mean, prior to 1914, it was legal.
Just like you don't want them to consume alcohol necessarily, but it's really what you do with it. I mean, the economic reason for it, like the economic efficiency reason for having some sort of policies to discourage the use of these things, is that they have external effects on others, right? You could say, well, I'm just smoking pot, doesn't affect anybody else. Well, maybe that's true, and if that's all that happens, then sure, you can say that you're just doing it to yourself. But the problem with lots of drugs and with alcohol and with tobacco is that there are external effects on others because you consume.
That's right.
And it's telling, I think, when you look at drug prohibition and the alcohol prohibition the movement that started in the teens, was mostly driven by women, because they were concerned about the external effects of the drug and alcohol use, which was domestic violence.
Absolutely.
And other crimes associated with
tragedies,
it. So the motivation originally was to reduce those external effects on others of drug and alcohol use, in addition to more paternalistic ideas of, you know, trying to make people do what they ought to do for themselves. But you can argue for all sorts of policies to reduce drug and alcohol consumption and tobacco consumption based on externality arguments, so free market arguments.
Absolutely.
So it's really not a question of necessarily whether you should or shouldn't discourage or encourage. It's how are you going to do it. So the question of drug legalization is not whether you're for or against drug use, but how are you going to control drug use, and how are you going to discourage it to, say, the level that's sufficient or whatever.
Okay, so let's pass a law and make it illegal. That'll stop people from doing it.
Boom, there, we're done.
That was easy. No, what goes wrong? What goes wrong?
Well, just about everything goes wrong with that, because for one thing, depending on the type of drug you're talking about, it's not going to have a very much of an effect on actual use of the drug, because the effect on a person who might be a consumer is that the price goes up quite a lot because it's illegal, so it's more costly to produce and provide, so the price goes up. But certainly if you're addicted to drugs, or if you're addicted to alcohol, or just want alcohol, you're not going to respond very much by reducing it. You're going to try to consume as much as before anyway. So what you end up with is a very small reduction in consumption, but a big increase in the price. And it's the increase in the price that causes all of these extra problems.
Yes.
So you've criminalized the trade. So because the trade is criminalized and becomes very profitable, now instead of producers going to law enforcement or to the courts to defend their property rights in their own businesses, they have to sort it out amongst themselves. So you get a lot of drug trade violence. And then you get
organized crime.
Organized crime, and then gangs fighting each other. All this is fighting over market share in the drug market. Whereas with most legal goods, you resort to the courts. You don't resort to violence. But you don't have that option if you're in the black market. And the other thing is that consumers find that they have to pay more for the drug or whatever, and if it's an addictive drug, then they'll commit crimes to consume,
Right.
to get money to buy the drugs.
And they'll pay more.
And more crimes will occur because the price is higher, and they're not going to respond much in how much they consume, so they're going to commit a lot of crimes.
Right. And
so it's
we
a huge
see
number of people who are either on drugs, who are committing crimes, or are committing crimes in order to pay for drugs.
Right, right.
So it's those extra crimes and criminal activity that you get, which is it's the opposite of reducing crime, it's increasing crime.
I want to introduce, because I think it's related, another point right off the bat, which is the international drug trade. And so because you brought up the point about the prices being so high, the amount that these international markets have to spend on smuggling and really on production is a tiny amount of what they're going to get back in the price. I think it's like 13% or something like this. And so there is simply no incentive on their part to do this, but the United States will put a lot of pressure on these governments to, maybe burn crops and things like that, which really doesn't put a dent in anything because everyone's got such a high incentive to find some other place to grow the crops.
Yeah, and you get, narco-terrorist states.
Yes.
Entire governments are taken over by the
Right,
drug trade.
Political corruption in the government itself, and then the peasants are mad. When the government does crack down to try and keep United States aid money, then the peasants get angry and go with guerrilla groups, and then we send in our military to fight the guerrilla groups. And so now we're totally involved in a very complex foreign situation, and I feel like this is happening all over the world. So I think there's a huge effect on United States foreign policy. It's something that doesn't come up a lot in the debate about the drug trade.
It comes from the choice of policy to reduce drug use.
Right.
Again, we can accept that we want to discourage drug use,
Right.
whether it's for efficiency reasons or for paternalistic reasons, health reasons, whatever. But you should choose the method that is most effective and has the lowest costs.
Yeah, and asking these governments to burn crops doesn't do anything. It doesn't change the
prohibition
flow at all.
and trying to enforce that domestically and internationally is just hugely costly and with a relatively little effect. So with the billions of dollars that have been poured into the drug war,
right.
There's been almost no change in drug use since say 1990.
Right. So that's ineffective, and we have these higher incarceration rates, in spite of the fact that violent crime, I think, has actually been reduced to some extent, right? But we've got so many more people in prison.
You turn more people into lifelong criminals.
Right, hardened criminals from being there in the prisons.
Yeah, and again, what people don't catch about this is that it's not about whether you encourage or discourage drugs or pro-drug use or anti-drug use. Mm-hmm. There are better ways, there are probably better ways to do it that aren't as costly and could be more effective.
Do you want to discuss some of your ideas along those lines?
Sure.
And kind of the economic analysis of the situation?
Yeah, so the one thing you can do is, and I think there's some lessons in how we dealt with other addictive drugs. One is alcohol, and one is tobacco. So there's a huge failure with alcohol prohibition. And it was a much bigger failure than the drug war because consumption of it was more widespread. So it was just a complete disaster. And eventually, the prohibition was repealed, and alcohol is being dealt with in a different way. It's being discouraged in some ways. There's tinkering with age restrictions and regulating it in different ways, taxing it. But all of those have probably not been perfect, but are much better than prohibition.
Can I challenge you for a moment on your claim that it was a worse failure than the drug war? And the only reason I bring that up is because you have the harm that's been done, as I said, already to foreign policy, but also to civil liberties with the drug war. And so I'm wondering if we can make that claim.
Well, I think since prohibition only lasted 15 years or something, as opposed to the drug war, which has been going on it's heightened since 1971.
Right.
And we have more abilities to do it. But I think it's in terms of actually affecting the quantity that's being consumed, it's actually worse. Because there's studies showing that alcohol consumption actually went up because of prohibition. Because, and there's probably some evidence about this with drug use also, but if you make it more difficult to get alcohol, then you're going to mean that each dose of alcohol that you take has got to be stronger than when it's legal. So beer disappears, bathtub gin becomes more popular, whiskey becomes more popular, so stronger doses become more popular. It's easier to transport.
Right, more
so
dangerous use.
Yeah, so alcohol consumption can actually go up because of it. Then drug consumption can go up because a similar thing can happen. So there's no light beer of heroin. Right? So with alcohol use, because it's legal, you have all these different types and levels of consumption that occurs. But prohibition makes that less likely to happen. The incentives all go the other direction.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, so when we come back, I want you to sort of lay out the economic analysis for us and let us know, maybe come back to the tobacco example as a comparison. Okay, join us again when we come back after the break.
Hey everybody! Heart disease affects 1 in every 3 women in America, but you can fight back. There's no time to lose. Mothers, sisters, daughters, families, and friends, it's time to shout louder, stand stronger, and demand change. Let's go!
To the Batmobile! Dang it.
To the invisible jet! Dang it. Together, we can put an end to heart disease. It's time to go red for women. I could use your help. Yeah! Learn more from the American Heart Association at www.goredforwomen.org.
Body language. Without saying a word, it can tell you so much. Like someone is having a stroke. Know the sudden signs. Learn fast. F, face drooping. A, arm weakness. S, speech difficulty. T, time. Time to call 911 immediately. The sooner they get to the hospital, the sooner they'll get treatment. And that can make a remarkable difference in their recovery. Learn the body language, the sudden signs, and spot a stroke fast.
You wanted to be a teacher when you were little, but things changed. Teaching didn't seem that cool anymore. So you decided to become something else. But what would your 12-year-old self say? Amazing things are happening in teaching, so it's time to put it back on your list. Don't try to convince yourself otherwise. You had it right the first time.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rachel Douchant, Director of the Liberty and Ethics Center here at Lindenwood University. Welcome back to our conversation about drug legalization with my colleague Howard Wall, who is the Director of the Institute for Free Enterprise, under which the Liberty and Ethics Center is housed. And before the break, you were talking about alcohol prohibition, famously a failure. Everyone admits it's a failure, led to the rise of organized crime. As you were explaining before the break, actually made alcohol abuse worse by introducing more dangerous forms of alcohol and making them more common among people. And so now to look at an alternative policy, what about the way that we've approached tobacco?
Well, so tobacco regulation over the last 40, 50 years has been pretty successful in reducing tobacco consumption. Much more known about that the public knows much more about the dangers of tobacco use, and through popular culture it's been discouraged, and taxes have been raised on it, and lots of variety of policies to reduce tobacco consumption. And now tobacco consumption is dramatically lower than it used to be, and it's even shocking now when you see it. When you come across someone smoking in a restaurant.
Yeah, it's very unusual.
If you go to a place without it. And
just a quick question, did Europe do anything similar to us? Because they don't seem to have been reduced their smoking.
Europe passed, they passed a lot of laws, but they're not, it's a mixed bag for sure.
Okay.
Certainly in France, you'll see people leaning up against a no smoking sign and smoking in the Paris metro. That's very common. So, you know, there are laws there, but their consumption is higher.
And I'm wondering if part of that may be just cultural as well, that maybe there's a stronger emphasis on the sort of shame of smoking or something in a more religious culture. I don't know.
Well, it's also a lot of this stuff comes with a lag. So that may have been what was going on in the U.S. 20 years ago. So we're at the forefront of many positive and negative cultural movements.
Sure.
So we were first in obesity, but also first in reducing smoking.
In reducing smoking, yeah.
But they're catching up in both respects.
That's right. And so how would we apply the same sort of logic to the drug war?
Well, what to suggest is that there are ways to use either some combination of taxes and regulation and education and healthcare treatment to reduce drug consumption, which will not have the negative side effects of dramatically increasing the price and therefore other crime that goes along with the trade.
Right.
And also by making it a legal trade, then you don't get the sort of the intra-industry violence that you have now.
You bring it out into the light, it's in an open market, and so you have the courts.
Conflicts between two firms selling heroin can be adjudicated in the courts rather than on the streets.
It sounds ridiculous to people when we say things like that, but the alternative has become really ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it's not that it's a good thing. You know, drug use is a good thing. We say it's a really bad thing, and we want to discourage it, and let's do that where we might actually discourage it. Now, the alternative is people will say, if you make it legal, then you're sanctioning the use of it, which is not quite true because there are other ways of being opposed to something without making it illegal.
Right.
But that's a common view. And, you know, it probably will be true that there is an effect if you make, certainly marijuana, if you make marijuana legal universally, then use will go up.
Right.
If you do nothing else. It'll go up in the short run if you do nothing else. But the point is that over time, you will bring it down and you won't have, again, it's the side effects of the policies that are a large problem, maybe as large or larger a problem of the use itself.
Right.
And again, it depends on which type of drug you're talking about. So taxes might work with marijuana, just like they've worked with tobacco, but taxes on heroin will not work because that's extremely addictive and so on. So that's more of a health problem rather than a kind of a market problem.
Yeah, exactly. And with the really incredible availability of all of these drugs, it's not like the availability has gone down at all. It's increased. I think the people who are going to be doing them do them, the harder drugs. And the people who aren't wouldn't, even if they were legal. So I don't see a huge shift in that regard. I think sometimes studies can be misleading. They'll show a slight uptick. You know, if a drug is decriminalized in London, for instance, they'll show a slight uptick in addiction, but partially I think that's a self-selecting mechanism. You have people coming in to where they can get a prescription, and then that raises the number of addicts in the area. But if you have something legalized across a broad geographical area, then you're not probably going to see that.
Yeah, and there are different steps, kind of somewhere in between legalization, where you kind of help out. So you have give out free needles. You know, there's needle exchange programs.
Sure.
And this causes problems. I've seen this in cities in Canada, in Vancouver, where you get areas where people line up for getting their needles, and now you've kind of destroyed that neighborhood because it's a hot spot.
That particular area, yeah.
But a lot of that is you're kind of bringing it out in the open.
Right,
and,
right.
You know, there's again, that's kind of a half measure, and you know, it's not really full blown.
I think your point about basically approving of something by making it legal is well taken. And I'm thinking here of the philosopher Thomas Aquinas, who really draws a very strong distinction between the natural law, which deals with all of morality, and human law, which only deals with the more serious wrongdoing and things that upset the social peace, basically. And he says, you know, there's plenty of things that are wrong and not recommended. It would not be appropriate to make them illegal.
Tobacco is tobacco. No one thinks that we should be encouraging tobacco use, but it's not illegal. Exactly,
and he makes this argument about prostitution, and part of his argument is not at all that he approves of prostitution. Of course he doesn't. He's a Catholic friar. Rather, his argument is that you have certain activities that people will do because you can't make everyone virtuous. And you have to expect that. And sometimes when you try to remove all vice, you end up taking out a lot of good too. And I think we see that in the case of the foreign drug producers, where our attempts to upset the drug markets has actually upset the process of those countries becoming market-based and having free markets in general, where really they could have developed that and then moved on to all sorts of markets. We've hampered the whole process just by trying to get in there and get rid of this one thing. And so I see that pattern there.
Yeah, and if just I imagine a fraction of the money we spend on the drug war could be used towards other policies.
Yes,
like treating it more
absolutely.
like a health issue, or treating, doing education, other things to discourage use would
Right.
be certainly as effective in reducing drug use, probably more effective, and would not have a lot of the negative effects of the drug war on the population as a whole.
It seems like a lot of the population doesn't really understand the disease concept of drug and alcohol addiction. And so perhaps that's part of the problem, is that it's strange to them to think of it as a health issue until maybe they have someone in their family or some personal experience and becomes very clear that a person is now out of control. There's no...
Well, and it could be you don't have sympathy for a person because, well, they made the choice to become a heroin addict.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true. You can say, yeah, that's their choice. But still, them being a heroin addict has effects on others. And it's, efforts can be put in to reduce it, other than trying to prevent them from getting the heroin.
Yeah, so
That's all.
it's really just a question, and I appreciate your point on this, it's just a question of what policy really works
Yes.
more than, or works the best. And there's no ideal. There's no ideal where we get rid of it all.
Right.
So we just have to admit that. Philosophically speaking, some libertarians try to approach the question totally in terms of doing no harm. And so they say, oh, look, it's my body, and you have no right to interfere with me. But I do appreciate your point about externalities. Certainly, we don't allow people to cry fire in a crowded theater, and I can't walk around naked. And there's all sorts of examples of externalities where we do interfere with one another. And so the concept, at least, is there that you can do that sort of thing. The thing that is more compelling to me personally is not so much my right to do drugs no matter what the consequences, but rather the fact that you do not have the right to, for instance, throw me in prison where I'm going to be abused by gangs and maybe turn, like you said before, turn into a hardened criminal. Some of the things that are done strike me as straightforwardly unjust as a result of the drug war. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's interference occurring that is unjust. And for whatever reason, the lack of your right to interfere is more compelling to me than my right to do heroin. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so the interference that I feel like almost perpetrate on people has had such terrible results, not just for individuals, for families, for neighborhoods, for whole economies, for foreign countries. I sometimes feel like the person who's waving the flag in front of a broken bridge going stop where you're going to fall into the river or something. Why is no one paying attention to these extremely harmful consequences of our policy? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, and it's I guess there's a notion of, it's a rule, it's a law, you have to follow the law, so you're at your own, you've done it to yourself.
So much more complicated than that.
And it is more complicated than that, but that's kind of the depth of the attitude towards it.
Right.
And, and I am in no way a libertarian, or somewhat a libertarian, but certainly not a libertine.
Yeah,
and
yeah, me neither.
It's difficult for me to get across that I'm not in favor of drug use. And
Yes.
That's a difficult thing to get across.
Yeah.
And also not in favor of, having policies that are worse than alternative policies.
Yeah,
and
no,
that's
absolutely.
the sort of point, is you can accept the reasons for reducing drug use or trying to eliminate drug use that prohibitionists start with, but then it becomes what's a good way to do that.
Right.
But still, it's just a very small c conservative where people don't want to change, right? You say, well, if we will be giving up, and there's also a thing that you don't want to give up on the drug war.
Yeah, and it's
And
strange. It's strange. Yeah. It's not working, so we need more of it. That's what we always talk about. It's strange to me that conservatives do tend to favor the drug war, because I do think of the notions of personal responsibility as not really lining up very well. It's very paternalistic type of policy, and once again, the damage, for instance, to civil liberties, the way that we have allowed search and seizure for a wider set of reasons is disturbing to me. And people who say they love the Constitution, well, that's the Fourth Amendment, guys. So it is a little odd to me. It doesn't fit in my mind.
Yeah, and the whole thing about property forfeiture that's now widely abused among police is meant to. It started with the drug trade, where it's if you're transporting drugs in your car, then the police can immediately seize your car,
right,
and they sell it off. Okay, now it's whatever crime you're committing, the police fund their own activities by forfeiture, and these things come through the root in the drug trade.
Exactly,
the drug
but property that they can even are suspicious was bought with drug money. If it was bought in cash, for instance, now you're suspicious. And I'm thinking of plenty of people who want to do business in cash for entirely other sets of reasons, and now they're under suspicion. So it feels very Big Brother to me. It's disturbing.
Yeah, and it's led to all sorts of abuse of police. The police corruption is higher. You see all sorts of problems that are could be avoided if you just dealt with the problem a different way, accepting that drug use is a problem.
Right.
But let's deal with it in a better way.
Okay, well, thanks so much for talking to me today, Howard. And join us again at the Free Exchange hosted by the Hammond Institute here at Lindenwood University. You can check us out on the web at www.lindenwood.edu/Hammond Institute.